When someone you love gets an autism diagnosis, you think clarity will bring answers and a clear path forward. But for most of us, it just brings more questions and uncertainty. In this episode, we'll talk about the reality of navigating a new diagnosis and the flood of opinions that follow from everyone and everywhere that seem to be growing louder by the day. Hi, I'm Dr. Teresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. This week, I was going to talk about something quiet, the moments after a diagnosis, when the news is still sinking in and the world around you suddenly gets loud. And then, in our real world in real time, it got louder. If you've been online lately or turned on the news, you probably saw headlines about autism, Tylenol, vaccines, all through a press conference that claimed to finally reveal the real cause of autism. I don't need to unpack every piece of misinformation because that's not what this podcast is about. But I do want to talk about what happens when your worldview is challenged by the people you're supposed to trust. When you or your child receives a diagnosis, autism, ADHD, any neurodevelopmental condition, you don't just get answers. You get flooded with advice, therapies, fads, articles, books, programs, and now apparently press conferences. Some of it comes from a place of love, some from fear, and some from people with agendas. But none of it replaces your lived experience and need for support. So today's episode is a reminder, not just for parents or educators or advocates, but for anyone feeling overwhelmed by the noise when they're just seeking some solid answers. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to question. You are allowed to trust yourself. So now let's talk about what to do with this flood of advice, the quiet grief we're not supposed to talk about, and the strength it takes to stay grounded when everyone else claims to have the answers. We're going to start at the beginning of the journey, when you or someone you love gets a diagnosis, be it autism or ADHD. You expect it to bring clarity and answers. I mean, that's what you sought to find out, right? A name for the thing you've been noticing, and then some idea of how to move forward. But the truth is, that moment rarely brings relief, not right away. What it brings more often than not is a flood of emotions, a flood of questions, a flood of information so intense it all sounds like noise. Like I said, you'll be offered books and therapies and interventions. You might read academic journals, and you'll surely see some Instagram infographics. You'll have friends who mean well and want to connect you with a friend of a friend who also has an autistic child. You'll meet strangers who feel oddly entitled to comment on your parenting or your child's behavior in public. Some will criticize you without even knowing a thing about autism. Some will pity you. Others will offer their own stories as if they have some universal truth. You're going to talk to doctors. Some will be compassionate, others cold and clinical. Some will downplay everything you raise. Some will catastrophize everything you say. You'll hear that it's nothing, that it's everything, that it'll go away with therapy, that it's going to be a permanent way of being and you're doomed, that you should act fast, slow down, maybe you should wait and see. And those are just the external helpers you seek for professional support. Then there's family and friends. Family members and friends who first saw nothing and now suddenly see everything. Who go from, he's just quirky, to, I've always known, to, you're not doing enough. People who have never read a thing about autism now know everything about it. Or at least they think they do. And even if they don't really know much and are not really well informed, they still have an opinion. And in between all of this, you're still just trying to live your life. You're trying to figure out how to get lunch on time and how to get to work and school and therapy and meltdowns and dinner and driving and what time to go to bed if you get to sleep at all. Meanwhile, a part of your brain is still stuck back on the diagnosis, that word, that moment, that line you cross that you can never uncross. And maybe, just maybe, you're not sure how you're supposed to feel about it. Because you knew, you did. Because that's why you sought support. But now it's real. It's written down. There's paperwork, reports, recommendations. And something about that official diagnosis makes it all heavier. I remember when my oldest was diagnosed. We were the ones who asked for it. We pushed for answers because we saw things that didn't make sense, that didn't fit what we thought we'd see at different ages and stages. So they sent our son for hearing tests, eye tests, speech evaluations. And after all that was concluded, we finally got the full psychological evaluation. Another battery of tests, hours of interviews, and then we got the word, autism. And I remember the moment, not because it shocked me. In my heart, I already knew, but hearing it said out loud, seeing it in writing, being labeled, changed everything. I cried, not because I don't love my son, not because we didn't expect it, but because the label made it real. And real meant this wasn't just something we'd work through. This meant that there was a whole new world of identity, of who he was, and what might be his future that I had no prior understanding or concept of. It was confirmation that our path would be unlike anything we had experienced before and not like anyone else's. And at that moment, it meant we had to, in some ways, start over. All the parenting books, all the conventional wisdom, all the things I thought I knew, suddenly not as useful as before. And no one tells you how lonely that feels. Because now you're trying to figure out what the right response is. You need support, but where do you go? Who do you tell? How will they react? Will they be kind? Will they dismiss you? Will they question it? And when you do get brave enough to share, to say the word to others, to tell people I'm autistic or my child is autistic, people immediately have opinions and worse, may even question the validity of the diagnosis. You are onslaught with the following statements. Oh, are you sure? Well, some kids outgrow that. Maybe it's just too much screen time. Maybe they should get off their tablet. My nephew had that and now he's totally fine. Have you tried this diet? Have you done ABA yet? You're going to go to speech therapy, right? I heard gluten makes it worse. You just need to be more consistent with them. You're too easy on them. They need more punishment. Oh, and you can't say grief. That's ableist. That's a lot to take in. That was probably a lot to listen to. But suddenly, you're not just parenting, you're defending, justifying, explaining, and sorting through contradiction after contradiction. Everyone has advice. Everyone has a study. Everyone has a story that proves your story wrong. And you just want someone to say, I see you. This is hard. You're not crazy. You're not a failure. You're doing the best you can. There is so much judgment embedded in this process, even from people who mean well. The autism and neurodivergent communities will all tell you, if you've met one autistic person, you've only met one autistic person. Because the spectrum is so vast and the experience is so different. It's true. But then these are the same people that will also tell you that if your experience isn't empowering or joyful or aligned with neurodivergent pride, you're doing it wrong. And folks, this is where I get stuck. Because yes, autism brings gifts. I talk about it. I believe it. I've seen it. My son's brain works in ways that are absolutely extraordinary. And I'd never want to change that. But extraordinary does not always mean easy. There are days where it feels like a superpower, and there are days it feels like a system crash. Some families have more support, more money, better schools, understanding teachers, good insurance, nearby relatives, neurodivergent role models, access to therapists who actually get it. And others do not. And that context matters. The same diagnosis looks very different in a house with resources than it does in a house that's barely staying afloat. That's not about love or effort or attitude. That's reality. So there's people that keep telling parents to accept it, but nobody wants to talk about how the world doesn't accept it. We're told it's not right for parents to be sad or frustrated or overwhelmed or exhausted because then we're not being supportive enough, or that we're grieving the wrong way, or that it's wrong to grieve at all. But let me say this plainly. Wanting life to be easier for your child is not the same as wishing they were different. Being tired doesn't mean you don't love them. Grieving a system that doesn't make room for them is not the same as grieving for your child for who they are. You can have pride and panic at the same time. You can be angry or sad that your child doesn't fit in a world as we know it and still be in love and completely amazed by your kid. When I see my son doing college-level math, learning languages on his own, reading philosophy books that most adults couldn't get through, I'm in awe. But when I see him lonely or misunderstood or overwhelmed by something simple, and I know the world will blame him before it accommodates him, that's when the grief hits. That's when I wish it weren't so hard. That's when I want to fix it, but I can't fix it. And it's not his fault, and it's not mine either. So if you're listening to this in the middle of your own diagnosis journey, whether it's your child's or you've recently been diagnosed yourself, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me almost 20 years ago. You are not doing it wrong just because it feels hard. You are not a bad parent because you cried. You are not anti-autistic because you want your child to have friends and be more easily accepted and integrated into mainstream society. You don't need to follow every piece of advice. You don't need to explain yourself to every person with an opinion. You don't owe anyone a perfectly polished narrative. You are allowed to sort through the noise. And that's what it is, folks, when we're all talking and not listening and not understanding or actually helping. It's noise. Even the well-meaning advice, the inspirational stories, the quick fixes, the miracle diets, it's all noise until you figure out what works for your family. You will find that some interventions are helpful, some are harmful, some have mountains of research, and some are still being debated. And you're not a bad parent for listening, taking time to consider, and more importantly, taking time to decide before acting. If there was ever a space to be cautious, this is it. You need to be mindful, maybe even wary, especially when people who are trying to sell you certainty. Because anyone who says they have the answers to all of this is either selling something or hasn't lived through enough of this yet. I know that was a lot, but it needed to be said. Because now we're seeing a new flood of information, of headlines, opinions, and outrage. And while it's all being debated online, real families are just trying to figure out what to do next. So if this brought clarity or comfort in this sea of misinformation and overinformation and more questions than answers, I hope I give you something to think about. I hope I give you permission to pause and breathe because you're not alone. There's many of us that are in the thick of it with you. And you need to know that you need to pause because desperate people will grab onto anything. And all of us deserve to find something solid to hold on to. And if you're still sorting it out, you're not behind. You're not failing. You are not to blame. You're doing the work. And the truth is, the diagnosis is not the end. It's only just the beginning. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Work Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.